pleasure to welcome everybody to our 23rd season of Sea Secret and the second lecture of this season. It's a program that started 23 years ago and is getting more and more popular every year. We are trying to bring for the community some of the top leaders in the field of earth sciences in general. And tonight is certainly not an exception. The speaker will be introduced later on. For those that have been coming here for the past few lectures, and certainly the previous lectures, you know that this year is very, very special for us. We are celebrating our 75th anniversary as a school. During those 75 years, the school has provided leadership in a lot of the discoveries that have happened, generally speaking, in earth sciences, with multiple applications that not necessarily everybody hear about on a daily basis, but a lot of the fundamental research is done here. And the spectrum of research that is done is very, very broad. We have activities going on fundamentally on weather and climate, and certainly some of the most interesting discoveries in hurricane forecasting and some of the basic climate processes going on have been found here. So that's on the one side of the spectrum. On the other side of the spectrum, we do maybe somewhat unexpected fundamental research in medicine. So we have research on cancer, on neurophysiological diseases like Parkinson, Alzheimer. So it's a very, very diversified. I want again to thank everybody for coming and participating in this program. I want to thank also the sponsors that help us put this program together. You know, today in higher education, especially at private school, we are really struggling with our capability to do all the research that we want to do, provide the quality teaching that we want to provide. And for the programs that we are doing, like the programs that we are presenting tonight, we rely completely on the contribution from our sponsors. So I want to thank in particular tonight the Bank of America, who joined us this year as the presenting sponsor of the series. And we certainly appreciate their support of our series of the University of Miami. We also want to thank additional Sea Secret sponsors. So we have the First National Bank of South Miami, Bill Galloway, who is in fact sitting here in the audience with us, the Shepard Broad Foundation, Cheryl Gold. We have the Key Biscayne Community Foundation that is sponsoring our program, the John McCann Foundation, Melissa and Taylor White, Mary Lou and John Dasberg, the Wang family, and Southern Glacier Wines and Spirit. We use also the contributions that are made to the school to invest in continuing on improving the school and offering to the next generation of scientists and citizens that we are educated here the facilities that are needed for tackling the most significant research projects. We have, over the past year, introduced a new tradition. Before we, in fact, present the main speaker of the evening, we ask some of our alumni and own students to come and explain to you why they chose to be at Rosenstiel and what exactly they are doing. So tonight, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Kaylin McMonigal. And Kaylin is a third-year PhD student in meteorology and physical oceanography. She is from Tacoma, Washington, and received a BA from Northwestern University with a major in math and earth science. Please welcome Kaylin.
Hello. Thank you, Dean Avasar, for the introduction. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about why I came here to Erasmus and my experience here, especially my opportunity that I've had to go to sea. So when I first came to Erasmus, it was also my first time being in Miami. So I came for the recruitment weekend 3 years ago. It happens in February. And I left Chicago where it was like 8 degrees Fahrenheit. There was snow everywhere. It was windy. And I came here and they took us out on a boat. And we were out on the ocean looking at the Miami skyline, 80 degrees, beautiful. And I was like, this is where I want to be studying oceanography. And I'm a runner, so I run over the Rickenbacker Causeway every morning after driving here for work. And I think it's amazing to be able to, see Miami, see the ocean, have the ocean right here in our backyards. And it always reminds me how much I love what I'm studying and what I'm doing. So one of the really cool experiences I've had while I was here is during my first year, I went to sea with my advisor, Professor Lisa Beal, and our research group. So we study the Agulhas Current, which is a current off the coast of South Africa in the Indian Ocean. And so we went on a 2-week research cruise of the Agulhas Current where we were measuring the temperature, the salinity, and the velocity of the current to try to get an idea of how much heat and salt the current is transporting, because it's a really warm and fast and salty current, so we think that it's probably transporting a lot of heat, and that could be important for climate. So we're trying to get better measurements of that. And I'd never been on a ship for more than an hour at a time at that point, and then it was 2 weeks, woohoo! But it was really fun. I enjoyed it a lot. It's hard work. But part of what I like about it is that it's really different than what I'm usually doing on a daily basis here. So usually when I'm here, I'm sitting at my computer, probably reading papers, doing data analysis, maybe preparing a presentation to give to someone. So it's a lot of thinking and sitting behind a desk. And then out at sea, it's a lot more hands-on. There's still some thinking involved, but we're doing a lot more things like taking water samples or changing the batteries on instruments, carrying instruments from one area of the ship to another. And so it's really hands-on, and I think it gives you an appreciation of all the work that goes into the data that then later on you're using in your analysis. So that was an incredible experience, and we're going to go to sea again soon to pick up the instruments that we deployed 2 years ago. So I'm really excited for that and to get a chance to look at the data. And then the last thing that I really enjoy here at Erasmus is I think the people are amazing. So after my research group goes and we spend 2 weeks together at sea, we still enjoy working with each other, which I think is incredible. And then there's also a strong student community here. So we have the wet lab, of course, but there's also groups of students that play volleyball. We go do yoga on the dock, and it's just a really nice place to be. So I think being here in Miami with the ocean, right here is a great place to study oceanography, and then Erasmus is a very special place as well. Thank you.
And I would like now to introduce Professor Lisa Beal, who is our Associate Professor for Research. So she is, in fact, everything that is happening here from a research point of view, she is responsible for it. All right? I'm kidding. But it's Lisa.
Thank you. So I'm also very proud to be Kayleen's advisor, as well as a Professor of Ocean Sciences here at the Rosenstiel School and Associate Dean for Research. And it's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Jon White. And Jon joined the Consortium for Ocean Leadership in September 2015 and was instated as President and CEO of COL in January 2016. Prior to this, he's had a very distinguished 32-year career in the US Navy, retiring at the rank of Rear Admiral. So White's passion for the ocean and for science began at an early age, growing up in Florida's Gulf Coast. And he earned a Bachelor of Science degree from the Oceanographic Technology from the Florida Institute of Technology in 1981, and holds a master's degree in meteorology and oceanography from the US Naval Postgraduate School. After working at sea as a civilian aboard a seismic survey vessel, he was commissioned through the Navy Officer Candidate School in 1983 and served as a surface warfare officer for 4 years. White joined the Navy's oceanography community in 1987, participating in numerous operational assignments at sea and ashore. He commanded the Naval Training, Meteorology, and Oceanography Facility in Pensacola, and later became the 50th Superintendent of the United States Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. White was selected as a flag officer and an honorary Chief Petty Officer in 2009, and served as commander at the Navy Meteorology and Oceanography Command at the Stennis Space Center in Mississippi. He was promoted to the rank of Rear Admiral in August 2012, and he assumed the role of oceanographer and navigator for the Navy, including duties as the Director of Navy's Task Force Climate Change and the Navy Deputy to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The Consortium for Ocean Leadership, for which Jon White is now president, is a community-based organization in Washington, D.C., working to ensure that sound science underpins ocean policy and decision-making at the federal level. As the voice of ocean science and technology, COL is a trusted resource for policymakers seeking credible information about ocean challenges and the opportunities, societal impacts, and science-based solutions that the ocean offers. Thank you very much, Jon.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. So I noticed that this is the second lecture of this year's series. The sixth lecture is going to be by Dr. Gruber, who's going to provide perspectives on the blue ocean from marine organisms. So I'm here to provide perspectives on the ocean from Washington, D.C. organisms. Some of you might argue which type of organism is more advanced. I'm not going to get into that. It's great to be back in South Florida and come out of Washington, D.C. I had a chance earlier today to take a look at an amazing wave tank that is really new here. Wave tank actually generates waves artificially, but this one is really neat because it can also put wind on top of the waves up to hurricane, like Cat 5 hurricane force, and look at the exchange of energy and moisture across that sea and air boundary to help us predict the intensity of hurricanes in the future, which is really great. Now, I did my ocean project back in 1981 at the Florida Institute of Technology in a wave tank that was about 100th of that size, looking at sediment transport based on wave action. The interesting part of that is that we had to use I guess what you would call a film camera, if everybody remembers what those are, a stopwatch in centimeters or inches, I can't remember which, taped along the side of the wave tank with a stopwatch plotted on graph paper, write it down, and actually, those photos didn't come with timestamps. So you had to go back, okay, the third photo was at this time, you had to do all that kind of stuff. And I watched a young PhD and undergraduate student click a mouse once and did everything that it took me an entire quarter to do in about that fast. So this is Todd, and thank you, the University of Miami and Erasmus, and especially the sponsors for putting on these programs. It's incredibly important, and hopefully by the end of the day, you will agree with me the importance of this type of effort to make sure that all of us become ocean literate, ocean experts. And there's a lot of ocean experts here in South Florida, which is very good, but we need to do a better job of getting it across our nation as well. So in terms of secrets, I think there are two things, hopefully, that you will leave. That two of the secrets are that I try to get across in my job up in Washington, D.C., is one of the secrets is that the ocean and ocean knowledge is critical to the survival of life on this planet as we know it. And that secret it's understood here, but not necessarily everywhere else. I'm going to talk about some reasons why. The other secret, which is almost a better kept secret, is that there are great opportunities to ensure that the ocean will do that going forward. And that secret starts right here in other institutions because of the knowledge and the incredible people who are devoted to doing that. So, and I'm going to frame this talk in the realm of this term, ocean security, and really take a look at it from the global security perspective. So as Lisa mentioned, I'm at the Consortium for Ocean Leadership, a long-standing, nonpartisan organization of about 95 members, including the greatest ocean science institutions in the nation and a few around the world as well, including Rasmus and many others, as well as industry members, other nonprofit organizations. And really that's it, is to advance research, education, and sound ocean policy, making sure that wise decisions are made which will impact all of us going forward. And yeah, you can see that you can't spell collaboration without us. This gives you an idea of our membership. Up in the top, you can see we do have some in Australia and overseas, but then around the US, pretty much all the coastlines are covered with members of our consortium as well. So a little perspective. Does anybody know where this picture is from? Just yell it out. The rotunda in the Capitol, not quite St. Pete, but close. The rotunda of our nation's capital, looking up at the apotheosis, the tallest point in Washington, D.C., except for the Washington Monument, by law. Blow it up. 1850s designed was this painting on the top of the ocean's capital. And there's George Washington with Lady Justice and Liberty and ladies representing the 13 colonies at that point, the founding of our nation. And this was to actually go in and represent the foundational concepts of our nation. This is defense, this is science, this is maritime. So think of maritime and science. 1/3 of the founding principles. And then we also had agriculture and industry and commerce as well. But oceans and maritime and science were understood as the foundational principles of our nation. So to think that science wasn't understood to be important by people like Ben Franklin right there would be not recognizing the great history of our nation. So I want to frame that, but a lot has changed since then. Changes every year from election to election, from one news cycle to another, and things have changed with the ocean. So things change with all of us. A lot of change, you could say, is very positive. This is me when I started college back in 1977 and when I was certified to dive back at the young age of not quite 18. So you can say, yeah, well, change not so great. This is change because this is where I did my checkout dives around this area, Palm Beach, in the Keys, when I got that certification. And this shows you what has happened to our coral reefs, which were even here, like a lot of places on the planet, were vibrant with life that was based on the coralline organisms and due to changes in ocean and temperature and other factors, this is what that reef looks like now. So we're dealing with an ocean that is changing a lot. So is this important? And this is the message that I try to get across, and you bet it's important. It's important because really the argument is that we have a planet ocean, 71% covered by the ocean, that's inhabited by a population of humans that's 7 billion-ish today, growing to probably at least 9 billion-ish by the middle of the century. The majority of those populations, especially in the African and the Indo-Pacific area, are going to live within a couple hundred miles of the coastline and rely on the ocean for basic needs, for their basic security and prosperity. So we have this issue as the humans are dragging way down the planet over here. Sustainability of our planet really goes down, and the risk of bad things happening goes up, and I'll explain why. But the opportunity to balance this, again, starts with knowledge, investment in knowledge, and really the resources to make a difference. And if you can understand that's the importance of this, and you walk away, how do we do this? And this gets into sponsorship and government investments and everything like that. Okay, so there's a feeling across a lot of our country in Washington, D.C., that this is where we are with regard to our ocean and our coastal community right now. We're on the brink. I don't look at it quite so negatively. I look at it as that we're at an inflection point, a critical point, and I think we have a lot of opportunities as well as challenges ahead to ensure this is not what a coastal city looks like by the end of our century. And I frame it like this. And this gets back to my ocean security. We have all these things that make sense to a lot of people. And again, this is not just national security. This is the basic security and safety needs, homeland economic. What do you need, our basic needs as well as human health, safety, and our national security? And the argument is that you can't get those without these ocean science areas, and include these key principles that relate to scientific knowledge. Without the knowledge, you can't get there, and I'm going to explain to you specifically why going forward. And the thing to understand, I get back to remember, policy and decision making. It starts with this value chain. I started this with a cohort of mine 10 years ago in the Navy to explain why the Navy needed to invest in this data and analysis piece. It's so expensive. Ships are expensive, satellites are expensive. Wow, why would I spend money on that? It's because if you want to make a wise decision, whether it's sending Navy SEALs ashore, what time, when, where to go, where to put submarines, can you launch aircraft off an aircraft carrier? Should you build buildings on bases with sea level rising? What's going to happen in the Arctic? Can we get in and out of the Arctic? What's happening with life in the Arctic and ecosystems? What's the impact of an oil spill? Should I allow people to drill or not to drill? These are decisions that all rely on this. The data that we gather, the analytical work that is done by great students and professors and researchers, and then somebody who can translate that in plain language to an impact and make a right decision. So remember this value chain going forward, because that has to do with everything as we try to ensure this foundation remains healthy in the days, months, and years to come. Days because, yes, we're facing another government shutdown here in, I don't know, a couple of days. Hopefully not. We faced another one a couple of weeks ago. My life in D.C. All right, let's start with Homeland Security. Nobody understands this better than the folks in South Florida. Looking at sea level rise, hazardous weather conditions, I talked about how do we do a better job of understanding what hurricanes are going to do, what a wave, and this is from China, from a typhoon, a real picture. What's going to happen with one of these? And you know, you faced it a lot. I was amazed coming down here and looking at the impact of Irma. It didn't make a lot of the national press, but there's still a huge amount of recovery, especially going south into the Middle Keys. That is down here. We look at this of people in island nations, the small island developing states. Some people call them the disappearing states. They didn't put the stuff in the atmosphere, the greenhouse gases that all the science says are leading to rise in sea level and global warming, yet their nations are going away. Some have already gone away. This is their homeland. It's not just a U.S. homeland, it's everybody's homeland. And this is in Norfolk, right next to the Navy base. 20 years ago, and this is just at a regular, this is at a sort of a regular rainy day with a high tide. You understand that here because you have the king tide situation here in South Florida. You understand sea level rise, and by the way, what are you going to do about it? Well, you know, you take a look at what they did in the Netherlands, and this is in Rotterdam, one of the major ports in the world, and they've at least engineered a way to close off the water if it gets too high in a storm approaching so the port isn't impacted. But you start to look at it, and this is where I get to say, what are the opportunities associated with this? And this is where you got to be inspired by the knowledge, the science and the technology to understand that we need to stop the change as we can, make decisions now that are going to reduce the change, but some change is going to happen, and sea level is going to rise. They get that in the military. Again, I was in charge of Task Force Climate Change, as Lisa mentioned. They're planning for sea level rise at the bases in Norfolk. So what do you do about it? Are there chances to change the way that we have architecture going forward, the way that we do transportation? Think of how transportation, how much different it is now than it was 30 years ago, and how much different it's going to be in the future. Are you really going to need to drive a car to work? I don't know. Are you really going to need to go to work, or are you going to do your work from home through a virtual existence and all these type of things? So look at the existence of and the opportunities there are to understand what is happening. And now we need to do a better job of that, and I will get into that as well. And that's a lot of great work that's going on here at Erasmus as well. But understand that these things are happening, but how do we solve the problems? This island nation's going away. What is China doing in the South China Sea? They're building islands out of reefs. Horrible thing, they're destroying ecosystems, right? Which is true. What about if we could get them to work with us and build islands where it makes sense to rebuild an island? Think about it. Food security. Huge issues, the food crises that are going on around our planet. Again, providing basic food needs in nations where seafood and fish are just the main source of protein for about 15 to 20% of the world's population. How do we look at an ocean whose health in terms of its fish, its seafood, all of the biologics that live in it is diminishing? And then how do we make a difference? Do we look at offshore aquaculture? Great work here at Erasmus going into offshore aquaculture. Looking at mariculture, as it's known at. Can we really learn how to sustainably farm the sea like we learned how to do even a century ago, arguably, on the land? We don't do it unless we listen to the science, the underpinning of the science that I talked about. And by the way, the number one priority of the gentleman Barry Myers, who's been nominated as the new head of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, is to reduce our nation's seafood trade deficit, which is around $12 billion annually. We import 90% of our seafood, although we have the largest amount of fishable waters of any nation on the planet. From a business and economic sense, it doesn't make sense as well. But how can we lead the way in the U.S. of ensuring that sustainable, safe, and if we're going to farm the ocean and actually solve these problems, I believe there are opportunities to do that. And again, it starts with the science and investing in the science. As we look at what's happening around the oceans, as we look at what's happening with the impact of the ocean on climate, droughts of where there used to be for many, many years growing a lot of food and a lot of crops, understanding that, being able to project that and say, from a biblical perspective, are there going to be 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of drought, and what do you do about it? The science allows us to do that, and that's why it's critically important for the investment. Not to mention this little issue we have called illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing, pirate fishing that's happening all over our planet and actually diminishing fisheries, and it's a huge crime against humanity as there are slaves on board many of these illegal ships that go out and poach fishing areas far away from the nations that they came from. The Coast Guard, we're involved in that. We're trying to figure that out. But ocean science can help, because if we know where the fish are before these guys find them, by reports, we can be there before that. Also, if we can understand how to grow and farm fish that are better than what you can get, we can increase the actual demand. If we can trace the food that is coming in, which thanks to the science of marine genomics, within a few years you're going to be able to stick a meat thermometer in a piece of fish and determine where it was caught and what subspecies it is and say, was it caught legally or illegally? And that helps to combat what is really a global crime going forward as well. All right, so think of water. And I was just reading articles today in South Africa. Huge water shortages there. We've had water shortages in California. People that are just, scrounging every day, people walking miles just to get a half gallon of water. Water shortages, and especially with an overpopulated world, becoming more and more important. See, with our reservoirs drying up. Now we know, and we're getting better and better at being able to create fresh water from the ocean through reverse osmosis and other types of fresh water producing plants, but they still require a lot of energy. Going forward with the science, can we figure out solar powered? This is a concept of how you would do, how you would create fresh water without having to use energy. These are the opportunities that are out there. Great opportunities. What a great business. If I could answer that question, I could make $1 billion. If I could figure out how to put little fresh water producing plants around the world as well. Energy security. So we look at the ocean in terms of an energy source, and for a long time we've been getting energy out of the ocean largely by drilling down beneath it and pulling oil and gas out of it, which can be ugly, that you can argue. Going forward, looking at energy coming from the ocean, we have ocean thermal, ocean engineering plants that can use, based on the temperature difference of the ocean, can create energy. Wave energy in the ocean is being looked at quite a bit by a lot of companies. Wind energy, and of course people say, well, I don't want those wind turbines off the coast. They hurt birds. They make a lot of sound. They drive the whales away. All these things are true, but what's the real science say? And is this something, what's the right decision going forward? What do the scientists say on this, whether I should be doing this or not? And what do I need to measure? What are the observation? What are the data? But if we look at the ocean, it has a huge potential for energy. But with the exception of a couple of people in here that have Teslas, Ronnie, most people got here today with a petroleum-based means of transport. So to think you're going to turn that off today, not going to happen. So science also tells us a couple of things about the oil and gas industry. One is that if we apply technology and we do it right, and understanding that there's a cost of doing business doing right, just like there is everything else, whether it's trains or cars, we can do it safely until we can figure out how to provide enough energy in a renewable manner. But then another interesting thing, when you think of science and what can inform us, we put a lot of stuff in the water to get the oil out of there, oil platforms. And then when the oars run off, we turn them off and we get rid of all the stuff and we plug them, hope we do it right. The oil's not coming out. What do you do with the structure that's left behind? And this is where we get into the programs like Rigs to Reef programs. Do you chop it off at 65 feet to below the surface so ships can't run into it and let it continue as a beautiful habitat? Where people like Sylvia Earle and others say these are amazing habitats. The California rockfish is an endangered species, the largest number living around some of the Rigs to Reef platforms out there. Making a right decision. Right now, the US is the only nation on the planet that has a Rigs to Reef program. Every other country of the world is spending billions of tax dollars and industry dollars to pull everything out and interrupting ecosystems like that. Science right now is helping to inform and hopefully change the minds of that so we can do what's smart. Pull it off if it makes sense, but if not, leave it there, spend that money, tax dollars or industry profits in a wiser manner, hopefully to build some of these things. Human health, the other type of security, or one other type of security. We see around the planet, of course, garbage and debris. You've heard about the garbage patches of the ocean. This would be a beach and probably an island nation where none of that stuff was made there. It was made somewhere else. One estimate by United Nations, an international organization, says by the middle of the century, we will have a higher mass of plastic in the ocean than fish. That's pretty scary. So, and it's the kind of things that we can make a difference now, and a lot of people are doing programs, small programs, stop using straw. Every time I get a straw in my drink, including at lunch today, I'm like, why didn't I tell them to not bring a straw? Because these things of single-use plastic, the straws, the lids on the cups that you get at Starbucks, all these things are just going, not all of it's getting in the ocean. We recycle very well in most of our communities, not all. But huge amounts of plastics are getting into the ocean, and they don't really dissolve. They break up over time into microplastics, then they get ingested and get into the tissues of the fish, and then we eat the fish, and then the plastics will get, you can see the whole thing is just a chain. So dealing with the actual debris are great, but what are the opportunities there? Well, there are some people that are looking at, first of all, how to clean it up. Going into some of the bigger current systems based on models of currents that start with the academic ocean, science folks like here at Erasmus, and putting big, giant plastic nets that have escape devices, and they move so slowly with the gyre that fish and turtles don't get caught up, but over time they catch a lot of plastics. Bring it in, take it to shore, and recycle it. People are starting businesses like that. And once you get the plastic, what can you do with it? These are shoes from Adidas made 100% out of ocean plastics. Go online. You can find them. They're supposed to be really, really comfortable. I haven't bought any yet. I asked for them on my Christmas list. But Lisa said they were way too expensive. So next year. No, but seriously, that's a lot of opportunities to do things like that. So this is a supergiant amphipod, this big, a shrimp this big, found at the bottom of the depths of some of the deepest trenches in the ocean, miles underwater. We're talking 5, 6, 8 miles underwater. These are really interesting because the pressure is so great that their cells work differently, as do a lot of organisms down there. And it's interesting because their cells regenerate. Some organisms that live down that deep have been alive for thousands of years. They're sort of organisms that keep cloning themselves over time. Their cellular structure is so different. If we can figure that out, then maybe we can figure out how to keep our own cellular structures from changing in the form of diseases known as Alzheimer's and things like that. So the biologics of the ocean. And if you talk to, and I just was on a panel with some folks from the National Institute of Health, they are looking at the ocean as a panacea of the next sort of breakthroughs in antibiotics, antimicrobials, because they're found ocean-borne bacteria, some of them, are secreting chemicals which can actually penetrate the hard biofilms of other bacteria like anthrax and the ones that cause cystic fibrosis and things like that, that nobody else has figured out how to do, but they're naturally occurring in the Atlantic Ocean. How do you grow those? Well, you can't grow them in a medical lab. You've got to find an ocean lab somewhere to do that. So the ability to understand, and as we explore the ocean, and we know how much the ocean is unexplored, not just the bottom, but what lives in the ocean and how the ocean works, we can look at to a great advantage. So huge health issues. And by the way, corals don't get cancer. Ronnie talked about corals a little bit earlier. How do I remember? He talked a little bit about cancer. How do we bring the medical community and our own community together? And I'll come back to that a little bit very soon. The economic security, things like invasive species, where in Japan they're catching giant jellyfish instead of the fish they caught for centuries because the competitors of the giant jellyfish that start off in China have been overfished, and now the giant jellyfish are getting fatter, dumber, and happier and exploding in population. So now they're impact fishing in the economies of Japan because those jellyfish are just, they don't have any competition. Harmful algal blooms. More and more as our ocean becomes less healthy, there are impacts to economies, to tourism, to boating, to food sources, fishing, and everything else. And of course, as we talked about, the coastal communities. But what are the opportunities going forward again? How do we do a better job predicting what is happening? And how do we deal with this and look at how can we grow our economies, or how can we take action to mitigate the impacts on our economies, going back to the seafood trade deficit as well. My idea is, and I'm waiting for an investor to come along with me, raise your hand or come see me after, a self-sustaining ocean sphere, if you will, self-sustaining. Energy, water, food, oxygen, self-sustaining comes from the underwater hotel there, the actual resort. Who wouldn't pay to go and stay there for a week? People pay Elon Musk, a bunch of them are going to pay him a bunch of money to go into space for like a half an hour. What about a week in the ocean? In Dubai, for $7,000 a night, you can have an underwater hotel room. Right outside of your king bed, you're underneath, and there's a coral reef right there. You might want to close the curtains because there might be a diver in there in the morning. You better be careful, but there is that. So what are the economic, why do we think, again, outside of the box about the opportunities to use science and technology for those type of things? And people should start thinking about what are the opportunities. I'm just one sort of older person here. When we look at national security, and ocean science in this nation got its start largely because of the Navy's investment in ocean science. Understanding the ocean gives us a knowledge advantage over the adversaries, our potential adversaries or competitors. I talked about understanding waves and reefs and things like that for Navy SEALs. Our submarines, according to Admiral Watkins, who started my organization, who was the head of the Ocean Commission, he was a four-star Admiral, Secretary of Energy back in the 90s, published a report in 2004. We won the Cold War because of our advantage in ocean knowledge and our advantage in understanding ocean sound or acoustics, so that our submarines knew where the Soviets were before they knew where we are. Just go watch the Hunt for Red October and you can understand the things going there. But now as we look at the technology that's going on with autonomous unmanned vehicles under the sea, that also applies to monitoring of oil rigs, applies to monitoring of coastlines, to going out and taking water samples and getting information and observations. So that technology that goes from our national security can also be used for other things as well. But our national security does rely on ocean knowledge. That's why the U.S. Navy still invests about $140 million a year in atmospheric and ocean scientists. Some comes here, not as much as used to. Hopefully the Navy will change its mind and start sending more to some of the institutions like that. Part of my job, as I've been told today by folks at Erasmus. So then it gets down to this. How well do we know the Earth system? The ocean, the weather, the climate, and the ice. And think of that data and analysis. It's the Earth system that we need to understand better. This is why the MAS of the Rosenstiel School, Marine and Atmospheric Science, becomes incredibly important. The interrelationships, whether looking at winds and on top of internal waves of the wave tank, and when are the hurricanes going to intensify, when is the Arctic going to melt, what's going to happen to the amount of methane, the amount of carbon in the ocean, and all these type of things relies on our ability to understand this entire Earth system. Where are we today? And it's a judgment call, like a judgment call on who's going to win the Super Bowl. I suggest we're here. We're still playing little kid soccer. Each kid has their own little soccer ball, their own little ocean model, my own data set, my own little project, the international, the US. We're working really hard and we worked together, but we're still, I think we should be and we can get a lot further with technology today so that at least within the next 10 years, we're at least at college soccer level, maybe even World Cup. By the way, how many of you know what decade starts in 2021 according to the International Ocean Council? Anybody? The decade of the ocean, from 2021 to 2030. So if we get our act together in the international scale now, can we use that? Can we really embrace a decade of the ocean going forward? How do we do that? We have time to get our act together if we really want to do it, from government to individuals to institutions. They have already decreed that. Or we can be a lot of other international things that are mandated and let it come and go. But if we want to get tomorrow to understanding our ocean so that we can have a healthy, sustainable, prosperous, and productive ocean, and that term is not necessarily oxymoronic, then we've got to get to work and we've got to invest in the science and the ships coming up. So what are the things that I see? So I come here, I go up to Lamont Doherty at Columbia University, I go to University of Alaska Fairbanks, only in the summer. And I take a look and I talk to students and faculty and I say, what are some of the concepts? What are some of the breakthroughs that are going on? And I've talked about a couple of them. So in terms of the technology, it's the miniaturization of things that used to take up this entire room to go down to the ocean now are basically the size of, I don't know, of a fist sometimes. And you can run them from your cell phone. When I was going through undergrad. Artificial intelligence. Well, if I see a change in the ocean and I'm an artificially intelligent sensor, then I can go and learn more about it. With anybody telling me, come up and giving the data, I go back in the laboratory and I analyze it. No, this is things that are happening now, following a front, following a change in the ocean. And machine-to-machine intelligence and having computers that can solve problems for us, an amazing time going forward. This technology is happening, and it should allow us to really make great advances in our terms of understanding, predicting, and sustaining our ocean and doing all the things we need it to do. And then we got this data management issue. How many of you have over 1,000 pictures on your cell phone? Oh, come on, probably 90%. And it's just backed up to the cloud? No? Yes? All right. Can anybody else get at it? Well, of course not. Nobody's going to see my pictures. So what about my ocean data? Well, I did my paper. I did my thesis, my dissertation, and my stuff. So I've got this whole thing on data, and I really want to share it, but it's so hard. It's going to take time, and it's going to take money. So this issue of we have huge amounts of data, how do we create a secure data management structure? Because that's another thing. If I start having artificially intelligent machines out there sensing the ocean, or ships in the future that don't have people to drive them, or somebody's driving them from their couch, like my daughter does playing video games. She's driving things around on a battlefield or whatever. Why can't you drive ships around in the future? Well, this becomes a huge key. So the technology to manage and secure the data going forward is also a huge investment. And it's big for ocean science, not to mention just getting the data. But then we look at what we're getting, environmental DNA, the free-floating DNA that's in the ocean. The cool thing is when organisms are out there, they shed DNA just like we all do in one form or another. Some shedding of skin and other stuff that comes out of our bodies. So that's out there. We can sample the water and determine what species are there in the water and over time how those have changed. They found dolphins around New York City and the water's there and things like that because they looked at the environmental data. The gene mapping, the genomics of organisms allow us to do the things I talked about in terms of fishing. Where did fish come from? Biochemistry, and I spent a lot of time with Dennis Hansel this morning talking about advances in biochemistry and what's happening with organic carbon and dissolved action and our ability to understand that more and more going forward. Because here's the deal, we understand a lot about the ocean that we didn't when I was in an undergrad, but we haven't been able to really get at the metabolic science of the ocean, the metabolic health of the ocean, like we do with blood samples. So with blood tests and CAT scans and all kinds of other scans that a lot of us have had in here, you can understand a lot about what's going on with the human body. If we start to look at these things, and also, by the way, what does the ocean sound like if we got rid of all the human sound, the anthropogenic sound in there? What are the natural sounds of the ocean? Can I do a passive ultrasound of a coral reef over time and determine what's happening before it actually happens, and how do I fix that? The science allows us to do a better job of understanding what's happening with the health of the body that is the ocean. And then can we figure out how to treat it, or what needs to be treated first? If I could do one thing, what would I do first? Would I stop the overfishing to increase fish populations in this area or that? Would I start dumping a bunch of baking soda in some areas to raise the pH and make it less acidic, which is what they do around some of the shellfish farms when it becomes a little bit more acidic and the pH drops? That's based on a lot of this. So the science to do this is incredibly important to take care of all the problems, and it gets back to this little pyramid as well. So we've got to invest in this. This is why I go over on Capitol Hill or in the folks in the executive branch of the administration and say, this science is really important. Space science is cool. We all want to figure out, we all want to be on Star Trek, you know? We all want to be captains and lieutenants. You know, they don't have Air Force people on starships. It's all captains and ensigns and lieutenants. That's why the Air Force folks don't like Star Trek, but that's okay. Navy folks love it. So here is my suggestion. Well, let me ask the question, do we need ships? Do we need these to go on with? How about these kind of ships? We need ocean research ships. Well, maybe not. What kind of ships? Yeah, we need ships, but I suggest the main ships that we need are these ships. These are the ships that will allow us to resolve all the security issues that I talked about. We as a nation, we ought to be leading this. We have the greatest science, arguably, amongst others, but these are the type of ships. Who owns this problem? Humans are an invasive species on the planet, you can argue, or at least, not invasive species, a parasite, if you will. Way overpopulated, not a lot of natural predators other than ourselves. And so we own this problem. The partnerships I talked about, the international partnerships, the partnerships among scientists. And by the way, so we spend a lot of time preparing to go to war with other nations. I did that for 32 years, and a lot of times it makes sense. But what if I was willing to take a little bit of a risk and said, instead of building $1 billion ship of this type, and I can say this, I'm not uniform anymore, what if I didn't build that one, but I spent $1 billion on a scientific partnership research project with, I don't know, China? Because a lot of the scientists in China, and I know some of them studied here or at other institutions, and they really want to fix things. They want to do some of the things that we've talked about. Would that be a better investment, a better ship? These are decisions we should be making. We can't afford to relinquish our national security responsibilities, but if you've got to, sometimes you have to make choices. And by helping to inform the government leaders, when they make these choices, think about the long term. Don't think about the crisis necessarily this week. What's the longer term, better way, wiser way to spend that dollar? Is it working with Russians or Chinese or others in the Arctic or somewhere else to solve problems that we've talked about? And all these things. And again, I get into sponsors, and it's not just our government, it's other organizations and people that invest in private institutions like the University of Miami. Incredibly important because of the great science that comes out of it. So I get back to the point of these are the ships that we need. And if we can build those ships that I talked about, we can really advance this stuff, and then we can help solve these problems with great opportunities going forward. And so we need to get the message across. And this is where we get into this point of, I'm amazed when I talk to a lot of people in Middle America, especially, not necessarily coastal, but some people coastlines, especially if you're not an ocean scientist or no ocean scientist or have a Erasmus right down the street, of, oh, that ocean science, it's cool, but it's really science for science's sake. Science for science's sake is important. To explore knowledge, to think of new ways to gain knowledge, exploration of the ocean, exploration of science, but ocean science, a lot of it, it's not just science for science's sake. It's really our survival is at stake, and we are at a critical point right now because we see what's happening with over half of our coral reefs being gone, and more so by the end of the century if they're not all gone. Looking at what's happening to our fisheries, our ocean health, our coastlines, the things that I've talked about. But we have an opportunity, and this is the part that really we can't afford to be a secret just here. So what can you do? Well, you're doing it. Some of you, again, thank you, sponsor, for doing this. You're doing it because the students and the professors, for not a lot of money, are investing hours and years of their lives in going to sea in incredibly hard conditions, including having to go to sea for a couple of weeks off the coast of Miami when you're coming from Washington State, and how arduous that was. I know. Or to take a Florida boy and put him on an ocean ship up in the Gulf of Alaska, Lord. Rather be in a prison somewhere in Russia, in Siberia probably, but anyway, at least it's warmer. But this is the key message. What else can you do? How many ocean scientists or congressmen or senators? We have doctors, we have lawyers. You know how many ocean scientists we have? Not many, 0. Which one of you is gonna be a leader, a governmental leader? We have some at the local, some at the state level. We need more physical earth scientists to be in leadership positions to help make decisions. Now we come close with Senator Whitehouse from Rhode Island, because he's married to Sandra Whitehouse, who has a PhD in ocean science and is on the faculty of the University of Rhode Island. And Senator Whitehouse will be happy to tell you she is the brains of the outfit, and he's, well, the loud guy. So I leave you with that, and I've got about 10 minutes, I think, for questions that I will take. But this is really the problem that we face is how do we look at the secrets of the ocean that we're uncovering every minute of every day at institutions like Erasmus and push those forward to embrace and solve the challenges that face us, that face our planet ocean, and really face our survival and survival as life as we know it on this planet. So I'll take your questions, but thank you for listening to me for a while, and let's move on.
Yeah, Ileana Muñiz, I produce documentary. You mentioned, do we need ships? Ships, no?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Okay, I was thinking a few days ago in education, no? So
Yeah.
we need scientific, we need to educate, as a documentary and journalist, I try to educate my community. So we need to educate people. So can we use cruise a great program because a lot of people go to ocean to educate people through that. What do you think about cruise, in the present in the ocean and the way that we're using the sources?
So you're talking about getting kids out to sea on ships, on cruises, right? Or
Using cruises for
Yeah.
research.
for research, but also for education. Yes. And that is going on. And I don't know the specific programs that are happening here, but I do know there are programs that get educators and students. By the way, are you a teacher? Oh, a documentary? Yeah. So, and by the way, have you seen the Blue Planet 2? Yeah? Yeah, we're watching it, right? Great documentary, right? Of course, it ends with a lot of bad news at the end of what's happening due to trawling and all these kind of things, which is great. But those are amazing, and those are very important. But as far as getting people, you're talking about getting students, educators out on cruises to see these or making more documentaries, these type of opportunities. Yes, go to the website for Rasmus, and there's a great 5-minute video by a scientist that worked with the University of Miami people on an Antarctic cruise and talks about this months going through the ice and taking samples, and there's penguins and all this kind of great stuff. A lot of resources are being put into that. But through partnerships, yes, we need to do more. The other thing that we're trying to do, and I manage it with my organization, we also manage a lot of programs around education, around thinking a bunch of organizations together with agencies, with industries to try to solve these problems, is looking at how can we bring the news media folks with ocean scientists. How do we increase what the news media understanding is? By the way, we also have to go in and find ocean scientists and teach them how to talk and not hide under their desks, because not everybody is as good as the folks that you heard up here tonight. So, but a lot of people don't want, and that's fine. But the ones that can and the ones that, how do we teach them to talk to Congress? A 4th grade school teacher is usually a pretty good person to take up to talk to Congress, by the way. And that's, this is my own observation, because you keep things simple and you don't dive into, well, if we look at the partial differentiation to understand the turbulent eddy coefficients associated with the air-sea interaction and the fluxes across the boundary, and the congressmen or senators just lost you, and they forget it, get out of here. So anyway. But your point is well made. A lot of individual institutions, and I encourage you, this is why it's great to come to these. So people go up and talk to her, look at the opportunities to get educators, because yes, sometimes there's a couple of available seats. Getting kids to sea on ocean research boats that are not college kids is really hard, because the Coast Guard has these issues of anybody under 18 going aboard a research ship, unless it meets all the Coast Guard requirements for safety and numbers of life rings and the rails and all this kind of stuff. So there's issues. We're trying to work on those. But there are great opportunities to partner with educators and documentaries and do small documentaries, because that's another thing. The Blue Planet is great. It cost millions of dollars and took millions of hours. But yet somebody out there with your phone with all your pictures on it can go out and do a documentary and post it on YouTube, or maybe it goes viral with selfies or whatever. So great points. So there are great opportunities, and I encourage you to see that. What else? Other questions, comments? Throw things at me.
How do you see the current environment, federal environment for funding? I know that there's been, I was a scientist when Reagan came in, and there was a tremendous reduction of funding that really crippled a lot of scientific areas for his term. I'm wondering how the current political environment looks for science in general and oceanography in particular.
It's uncertain. But since we don't have a budget after Friday, the whole thing is uncertain, right? So the president put forward a budget last year about this time for the current fiscal year that we're in, started in October of last year, and now we're halfway through, and we still don't have a budget. We're operating on a continuation of the budget line going back in 17, which started late. The whole thing is a mess. We know that. By the way, there are some countries I've heard that have a deal that your job as a parliament and Congress is that your main job, so if you have one, you only have one job, is to pass the budget by X date, and if you don't, they have a recall election for all of them. Just a thought. think about such things. You're the citizens, but I will tell you, it doesn't look good, but there's hope because Congress has gotten a lot more interested. Under the last administration, everybody, well, there was plenty of scientists working for President Obama, and science was good. Even under President Bush, he loved the ocean. He made more national sanctuary monuments than any president has. So, it's not all times about this party or that party, but the current administration is questioning the value of science. Ocean science, too, and that gets back to it's security. It's not just science for science's sake. So Congress is being influenced. Your congressmen and your senators realize that it's now on their shoulders. So they're actually sticking up for science a lot more than they have, and I'm encouraged by that because Congress passes the budget, Congress does the funding. But the problem is, best case I see is flatline for funding in ocean science right now. That's why we have to change that. That gets into my argument of it's survival at stake. One ship versus another ship. We've got to keep that voice going. It's not just me, it's all of us, it's the institution, it's the kids that are going through school, the students, the young men and women, getting their voices heard. But I think we still have a little bit of time to still get this done. But we've got to inflect that curve in terms of earth science, especially. Because even flat funding is not flat funding. The cost of everything, the cost of education, the cost of the ships and infrastructure and laboratories and this amazing technology that I talked about, that costs money. Flat funding is negative capability. So that's honestly where we are, but I'm a little bit more encouraged than I was at the beginning of last year because of what our congressmen and senators are doing. Sir.
Do you have any specific program to try and reach a government that doesn't really believe in science?
It's a clandestine program. I can't talk about it. Well, yeah, I have a program, and the program is my advocacy effort, we have several programs where we bring together the federal agency leaders in the oceans. People such as Admiral Tim Gallaudet, who replaced me as the oceanographer of the Navy, and now he's the acting head of NOAA. He will be the deputy head of NOAA. One down from the Secretary of Interior, big ocean person. So we have leaders in the federal agencies who we bring together to try to ensure that we're singing in harmony as we go forward. I have programs to convene the ocean science industry and government community in forums up in Washington, D.C., inviting people from the administration. We have programs going forward to meet with the people in the administration. That's part of why Rasmus and others paid dues to be part of our consortium, because we are taking on those jobs under a lot of different programs and avenues. But really, that's part of what my entire program is about, is again, discovery, understanding, and action. It's the understanding to action piece. And I can talk about, you can go on our website and look at the forums we have coming up on mariculture and aquaculture and using that to resolve the seafood trade deficit. We can talk about the Rigs to Reef program and things like that. Those are just a couple of examples of specific avenues that we go down. By the way, spending a lot of time with Congress for the tax reform, because there was an idea on the House side to tax the tuition grants that PhD students or graduate students were getting, which would have been devastating. So what happened, myself with a lot of help in DC, went over and sat in the offices of a lot of congressmen, a lot of Republican congressmen, says, oh, by the way, you've got, a University of Miami, a University of Florida, University of Texas, or wherever it may be in your state. If this becomes part of the tax reform norm, you're going to lose about 25% of your graduate school folks. And so they got it, and they made sure at the end that wasn't in there. So we have a lot of programs that are going to boost with both the executive side of the administration. Are we making a lot of headway on the executive branch? Not as much as I would like, but the agency heads are there. It's that inner circle, if you will, that we still got to work on. But again, the problem was a little bit longer than just one season, too. So don't be too discouraged, and we keep our game going, and I think we can make a difference. I know there are great people. I know some of them personally who are also higher level up in the White House organization as well, if we can just get their attention and focus on some of these things. So yeah, we have programs that do that. That one over here, yes.
My name is Don Sackrider, and I swim at the beach at Cape Florida Lighthouse almost every day. And you should see the trash pickup on Monday morning on that beach. And I think we have the ability to monitor by robots or from outer space in this day and age, and do something to make these people afraid to be litterers and litter the ocean, take better care of it. What do you think of that?
I absolutely, now you can't, penalizing fines, whatever programs that we need, but absolutely. Then I take, for example, the Isle of Wight, I think it is, in Scottish Isles, went from 20, even 10 years ago, they looked like that. They got a community. It's a small island with, 8,000 people or something. I don't know, I think 10,000, but they got 8,000 people to sign up before becoming trash collectors. They all volunteered and they get out on the beach. Now they have trash cans. There's not a speck of trash on the beach. How do you change human behaviors? Carrot, stick, and ocean literacy are big things.
The idea is not to collect it, but to prevent them from, if they carry it in, they can carry it out,
Yeah, and we've tried this. We've done it with litter to some degree. Still a problem in our country on the land side, smoking, other things. But yes, programs of monitoring that, absolutely.
They could do it from outer space, actually, or robots of some kind.
You can monitor it, but the enforcement issues and freedoms and oversight, great ideas. Have these ideas with your local leaders. Keep them. And those are the kind of things that we are talking about. It really gets into how you do it, but changing the behavior of people that interact with our ocean. Amen.
Thank you.
That's what I tell you. Thank you very much for that. I got one more, maybe. Where's my boss over there? A couple more. Okay, we've got over here, sir.
Yeah, as a follow-up to that one, there are two observations that I have walking the beach on Key Biscayne, and one of them is the trash. And by the way, I'm convinced that a fair amount of it is coming from ships and boats, and not all from the land. Some of it from the land, and some of it from people that just leave stuff. But an awful lot of it is coming from boats and ships, and we have to figure out how to stop that. The second thing that's coming from ships is the pollution associated with their diesel engines. And we receive a lot of that on our place on the ocean side of Key Biscayne. And if we don't mop our deck very frequently, we have black soot coming in all the time. So my question is, how do we stop those kinds of things coming from shipping?
Make all ships operate like the Teslas with battery power, which we talked about today. One means is technology. The other means are regulatory enforcement, the mixture of that. There are regulations out there. They're not enforced in terms of the amount of carbon in which you can put out of your exhaust stacks. Companies are becoming more and more observant of that. But it gets back to this issue of changing the actual behaviors of people wanting to make a profit. If I wait another 2 years or 5 years or 10 years before I do a change out of the the engine and exhaust system, I can make more money. So through regulatories, enforcement, voices like yours of people that can make a difference in communities that can not just vote but can advocate, I think we can make change. So keep talking, put together groups, keep talking to people like me, send us your good ideas, and do that. All right, are we going to do one more for this gentleman, and I think we better close shop here, or Deanne is going to.
Some years ago, I saw a diagram of the complex interconnections and the dependency on krill in the ocean, especially in the areas of Antarctica, say. Mm-hmm. I loved your piece on the ships and partnerships. So I had also, I believe, heard that Russia and other countries had thought about going in and sort of mining and collecting krill for various purposes. I wonder about inspiring some of these wonderful young graduate students to sort of spread the word that I think this could be very crucial to the oceans of the world, to deplete the krill on a massive scale.
Critical. What's happening to krill, and not just that, is the ice shelves in Antarctica change and in the Arctic change. We're also seeing huge changes in phytoplankton, which impact the zooplankton, which impact the krill and other organisms, and then it goes all the way up the food chain and all the way up to seabirds and mammals and everything else. Understanding that change is really hard because it takes a lot of money to get there and study Antarctica and the Arctic. Those changes are huge. But yes, if we can influence, and that's what I'm seeing happening. That's why I am optimistic about that. Because again, it starts here at the institutions. International cooperation, students going back and forth, getting their undergraduate, their graduate degrees here, and going back and working in and eventually running science organizations in other countries like Russia. How do we do better jobs of partnership? Because that's the only chance we have. We've got to change human behavior at the basic level of what you put out of your ship, throw off your ship, or leave on the beach, but also how do governments, including fishing industries, that are government subsidized, how do we change those? But if we don't invest in the principles of education and scholastic pursuits, like you're here at Rasmus and the hundreds and thousands of other institutions around our country, across the world, if we don't understand the value of those, we won't be able to turn this ship around like we're going to have to. So that's why I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thank you for supporting ocean science and atmospheric science. Thank you for being here.